Marcus Chen stood in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom, one hand gripping the frame while Lily's breathing finally settled into sleep's steady rhythm. 3 stories about dinosaurs and 2 trips for water had done the trick. The glow from his phone cut through the darkness as he pulled it from his pocket, thumbs moving across the screen with practiced speed. "I miss you too." He hit send without a second glance, already turning toward the hallway when his stomach dropped. The name at the top of the thread wasn't David Park. It was Rebecca Thorne, his CEO. 3 seconds of frozen silence, then the notification appeared. Rate 11:47 p.m. No reply, just that single word confirming she'd seen it. Marcus stared at the screen, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass, and knew with absolute certainty that tomorrow might be the last day he ever walked through the doors of Helix Technologies. The apartment around him felt smaller, suddenly. Lily's toys were arranged in neat bins along the wall, dinosaurs with the dinosaurs, building blocks sorted by color. Everything in its place because that was how Marcus kept control of a life that had spun wildly off course 4 years ago when Jennifer walked out. The kitchen light still burned from where he'd forgotten to switch it off, casting a yellow rectangle across the worn hardwood. Rent was due in 12 days. Lily's school tuition payment would hit his account in 3 weeks. The Honda in the parking garage below had 218,000 miles on it and a check engine light that flickered on during cold starts. He couldn't lose this job. Marcus moved to the living room window, phone still clutched in his hand. Forest Glen stretched out below, rows of modest apartment buildings interspersed with corner stores, and the occasional tree struggling against Chicago's concrete sprawl. Somewhere out there in a high-rise with a view he could only imagine, Rebecca Thorne had just read 3 words he'd meant for someone else entirely. Words that now hung in the digital ether like an accusation. Sleep didn't come. Marcus lay in bed watching headlights sweep across his ceiling, constructing and dismantling scenarios. Maybe she'd think it was a wrong number. Maybe she wouldn't remember which Marcus worked in facilities. Maybe she'd never looked at his employee file and didn't know he existed beyond a face occasionally glimpsed in some hallway. But that single word, read, mocked every attempt at rationalization. At 5:30, he gave up, pulling on jeans and the cleanest work shirt he could find. Lily wouldn't wake for another hour. He started coffee and stood at the counter while it brewed, watching dawn paint the sky in shades of industrial gray. The coffee tasted like battery acid. Marcus drank it anyway. By 6:30, he was moving through the apartment with deliberate calm, making scrambled eggs and toast cut into triangles the way Lily liked. She appeared in the doorway at 7, hair sleep-wild, clutching the stuffed brachiosaurus she'd named Steven. Her small face tilted up toward his, brown eyes searching with that uncanny perception children sometimes possessed. Marcus felt the question coming before she spoke it. "Daddy, why you look scared?" He crouched down, bringing himself to her level, and manufactured a smile that felt like cracking ice. "Just tired, baby girl. Long day ahead." Lily studied him a moment longer, then seemed to accept this explanation. She climbed into her chair and attacked the eggs with the serious focus she brought to everything. Marcus watched her eat, memorizing the way morning light caught in her dark hair, the smear of egg yolk on her chin. If he lost this job, he'd have to pull her from the after-school program. His mother, Margaret, would help, but she was 65 and still working part-time at the library. There were limits to what he could ask. The drive to Margaret's house took 20 minutes through traffic that was already thickening toward rush hour. His mother lived in a tidy bungalow in Jefferson Park, the same house where Marcus had grown up. She opened the door before they reached the porch, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "Something wrong, son?" Marcus handed over Lily's backpack, avoiding his mother's gaze. "Just work stuff. Mom, I'll pick her up by 6. Margaret's hands settled on his arm, warm and steady. "Marcus?" He met her eyes then, saw the concern there, the lifetime of reading him in a single glance. "I'm handling it." She didn't look convinced, but nodded anyway. "We'll be fine. Won't we, Lily?" Lily wrapped herself around Marcus's legs in a fierce hug before releasing him and darting inside toward the promise of Margaret's homemade cinnamon rolls. Marcus stood on the porch a moment longer, watching his daughter disappear into the house's familiar warmth, then turned back toward his car and the long commute downtown. The twin spires rose against Chicago's skyline like glass monuments to ambition, Two towers connected by a suspended bridge of steel and glass 30 floors up. Helix Technologies occupied both buildings, a sprawling empire of innovation that had transformed cloud computing infrastructure over the past decade. Marcus badged through the employee entrance at 8:15, nodding to Jake at the security desk. "Morning, Marcus. You look rough." "Feel rough. Too much coffee, not enough sleep." Jake laughed, waving him through. "Know that feeling." The elevator carried him to the 14th floor, where the facilities department occupied a warren of cubicles and equipment rooms. Marcus dropped his bag at his desk, powered up his laptop, and immediately pulled out his phone. No new messages. The text to Rebecca sat there in his history like evidence of a crime. "I miss you too." God, what had he been thinking? He hadn't been thinking. That was the problem. He'd been exhausted and distracted, and his fingers had found the wrong name in his contacts. David Park appeared around the cubicle wall at 9:30, coffee in hand, his round face split by a grin that dimmed the moment he saw Marcus's expression. "Dude, you look like death." "Thanks, David. Exactly the confidence boost I needed." David settled into the spare chair, concern replacing amusement. "Seriously, though, what's wrong?" Marcus glanced around, confirming they were alone, then shook his head. "Nothing I can talk about here." "Is it Lily, your mom?" "No, they're fine. It's just—" He stopped, recognizing the futility of explanation. How could he explain that a simple mistake might cost him everything? That he'd accidentally sent 3 words to the most powerful person in the building? "Work stuff. I'll figure it out." David studied him another moment, then stood. "All right, but I'm buying lunch if you want to talk." After David left, Marcus forced himself to focus on the maintenance schedule. 3 HVAC units needed inspection on the 22nd floor. There was a recurring issue with the electrical system on 18 that required documentation. Normal work, routine tasks. Except he checked his phone every 5 minutes and his hands shook whenever he tried to type. At 10:15, David reappeared, his expression strange. "Bro, you hear about the boss?" Marcus's stomach clenched. "What about her?" "She didn't come in this morning. First time in like 3 years she's missed the executive meeting." David's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "People saying she left some board dinner early last night and nobody's seen her since." The floor seemed to tilt. Marcus gripped the edge of his desk, fighting down nausea. It was because of him. It had to be. Rebecca Thorne didn't take personal days. She was notorious for working through holidays, for being first in the building and last to leave. If she'd suddenly vanished, if she'd broken a pattern everyone recognized. "Marcus, you okay?" "Yeah, fine." The words came out strangled. "Just surprised, that's all." David lingered, clearly wanting to press further, but Marcus turned deliberately back to his laptop until his friend took the hint and retreated. Once alone, Marcus buried his face in his hands. This was worse than getting fired. This was having caused some kind of breakdown in a woman who'd built a billion-dollar company through sheer force of will. Whatever Rebecca Thorne was dealing with this morning, he'd triggered it with his careless mistake. The morning crawled past. Marcus went through the motions of work, responding to emails, checking systems, all while his phone remained stubbornly silent. By noon, he was wound so tight he could barely sit still. When his phone finally buzzed, he grabbed it so fast he nearly dropped it. Lily's face filled the screen, gap-toothed grin bright against the background of her after-school program. "Hi, Daddy. I made a turkey out of my hand today. Mrs. Patterson said it was the best one." Marcus felt something in his chest unclench slightly. "That's amazing, sweetheart. I can't wait to see it." Lily held up a construction paper bird, hand-traced and colored in enthusiastic if uneven crayon strokes. Pride radiated from her small face. Then her expression shifted, became more serious, and she tilted her head in that way that meant she was really looking at him. "Daddy, are you sad?" The question hit harder than it should have. He was supposed to be the strong one, the provider, the man who held everything together after Jennifer walked away. He couldn't afford to fall apart over a text message. Lily needed him stable, dependable, unshakable. "Just tired, baby girl. Long day at work." Lily nodded with a solemnity that seemed too old for 6. "When you're sad, you should eat ice cream. That's what Grandma says." Despite everything, Marcus laughed. Grandma's pretty smart. After they hung up, he stood in the empty hallway outside the facility's office, pressing one hand against his chest where anxiety had lodged itself like a stone. He had to hold it together. For Lily, for the life they'd built from the ruins of his marriage, for everything that depended on him staying employed and functional and present. But the silence from the 32nd floor was deafening. Every hour that passed without word felt like another nail in his coffin. The call came at 2:15. Marcus was elbow deep in a maintenance request form when his desk phone rang with an internal extension he didn't recognize. He stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "This is Marcus." "Mr. Chen." The voice was female, professionally crisp, unfamiliar. "This is Patricia, Miss Thorne's executive assistant. She'd like to see you in conference room A on the 32nd floor. Immediately, please." The line went dead before he could respond. Marcus sat frozen, phone receiver still pressed to his ear, mind racing. The executive level, where facilities staff only went when something was catastrophically broken or someone was about to be fired. He replaced the receiver with a hand that trembled slightly, then stood. His legs felt uncertain beneath him. The elevator ride lasted an eternity. Marcus watched the numbers climb, his reflection pale and distorted in the polished steel doors. When they opened onto the 32nd floor, the change was immediate and absolute. Thick carpet muffled his footsteps. Abstract art lined the walls, the kind that cost more than his annual salary. The air smelled faintly of expensive coffee and fresh flowers, a world away from the industrial functionality of the 14th floor. Patricia met him at the elevator, a severe woman in her mid-50s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. She said nothing, simply gestured for him to follow. They walked past Rebecca's corner office with its glass walls revealing an empty desk and a view of Chicago's skyline that made Marcus's breath catch despite his anxiety. Conference room A sat at the end of the hall. Patricia opened the door, ushered him inside, and closed it behind him without a word. The room was empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, gray clouds pressing low against the buildings. A long mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Marcus stood near the door, uncertain whether to sit or stand or simply bolt for the exit. He pulled out his phone, desperate for any distraction, and that's when he saw it. A notification in his messages, timestamp 2:03 p.m. Conversation forwarded. His blood turned to ice. Somehow in his nervous fidgeting or his desperate checking of messages, he'd forwarded something. His fingers flew across the screen, pulling up the message thread, and there it was, his entire text history with David, including the conversation from 3 weeks ago that he'd completely forgotten about until this moment. The words stared back at him from the screen, each one a separate nail in his professional coffin. David, dude, why do you always get quiet when Rebecca's name comes up? Marcus, I don't know, man. She's impressive, obviously brilliant, scary smart, but sometimes when I see her in the hallway late at night, she looks exhausted, like she's carrying this entire company on her shoulders alone. I know it's stupid, but part of me wishes I could just talk to her, not as employee and CEO, just as two people who both seem to understand what loneliness feels like. She built this empire, but I wonder if she has anyone to share it with. David, bro, you sound like you have a crush on your boss. Marcus, it's not like that. I see someone who's trapped by their own success. And I've been there, different scale, but the same cage. Marcus sank into one of the leather chairs, his legs no longer able to support him. It wasn't just the misdirected, "I miss you." Rebecca Thorne had now read every honest, vulnerable thought he'd ever expressed about her. Every observation he'd meant to keep private, every moment of empathy he'd never intended her to see. She knew he watched her, noticed her, thought about her loneliness and her exhaustion and her isolation. He was finished, not just fired, destroyed. The door swung open with enough force to make Marcus jump. Rebecca Thorne stood in the doorway, her dark hair damp from rain, her usually immaculate blazer spotted with water droplets. She must have just come in from outside, must have entered the building specifically for this meeting. Her expression was unreadable as she stepped into the room and let the door close softly behind her. Marcus scrambled to his feet, words tumbling out before he could stop them. Miss Thorne, I can explain. The messages were never meant to go to you. It was an accident, a technical glitch, or maybe I hit the wrong button, and I completely understand if you need to terminate my employment. I just want you to know that I never intended any disrespect, and I would never presume to. Rebecca held up one hand, and his flood of words stopped instantly. She studied him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face with an intensity that made him feel completely exposed. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than he expected. Are you afraid of me, Marcus? The question caught him completely off guard. What? She took a step closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor at the edge of the carpet. Right now, in this moment. Are you afraid of me, or are you afraid of losing your job? Marcus swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet her gaze, even though every instinct screamed to look away. Both, honestly. Something flickered across her face, not anger, not the cold dismissal he had expected. Something that looked almost like recognition, like she understood exactly what he meant. She moved to the window, standing with her back to him as she looked out at the rain-streaked city below. I read what you wrote, all of it. Marcus closed his eyes, waiting for the axe to fall. And I have to admit, I wasn't sure how to respond. She turned to face him, and for the first time since he'd known her, which admittedly was only from a distance, only through glimpsed moments and overheard conversations, Rebecca Thorne looked uncertain, almost human. No one has ever described me as lonely before, at least not to my face or even behind my back as far as I know. Her arms crossed over her chest, a defensive gesture that seemed completely at odds with her usual commanding presence. Most people are too busy trying to impress me or avoid me to notice anything at all. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Marcus felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether the next step would save him or send him plummeting. I shouldn't have written those things. His voice came out rough. It was unprofessional. I was just venting to a friend, and I never imagined. Rebecca shook her head slightly. Don't apologize for being honest. It's refreshing, even if the delivery was unconventional. She moved to one of the chairs and sat down, the gesture so unexpected that Marcus simply stared. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit, please. I'm not going to fire you, Marcus. I just want to understand. He lowered himself into the chair, still half expecting this to be some elaborate trap. But Rebecca's expression held no malice, only curiosity. And something else, something that looked almost like hope. You said I carry the weight of this company alone. Her voice was soft now, almost vulnerable. You're not wrong, but I'm curious how you noticed. We've barely spoken beyond the occasional elevator greeting. Marcus hesitated, weighing his words carefully. I work in facilities. I'm in and out of every floor, every department, every time of day. Sometimes you see things when people think you are invisible. He paused, gathering courage. And I noticed that you're always here. First one in, last one out. You eat lunch at your desk when you eat it all. You never leave for holidays until everyone else has gone home first. His voice softened despite himself. I recognize it because I used to be the same way before Lily. Before I learned that working yourself to death doesn't actually fix anything. It just makes you good at being alone. Rebecca's carefully composed expression cracked just slightly. She looked away, her jaw tightening, and Marcus saw her swallow hard before speaking again. You have a daughter, Lily, right? The shift in subject surprised him. Yes, ma'am, she's 6. The best thing that ever happened to him. The corner of Rebecca's mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. I've seen her picture on your desk during the floor walkthroughs. She was quiet for a moment, and Marcus realized with a start that Rebecca had noticed him, had paid enough attention to remember details about his life. The thought should have been unsettling. Instead, it felt oddly intimate. I don't have children. Rebecca's voice was distant now, as if she were speaking to herself as much as to him. Never had time, never found the right person, and now, she trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished, hanging in the air between them like a confession she couldn't quite bring herself to complete. Marcus shifted in his seat, uncertain how they had arrived at this moment of strange intimacy. Can I ask you something? Rebecca tilted her head, regarding him with those sharp green eyes. You've already told me I look lonely. I think we're past formalities. Despite everything, he almost smiled. Why am I here, really? You could have had HR handle this. You could have fired me through an email and never thought about it again. Why the personal meeting? The question hung in the air. Rebecca was silent for so long that Marcus began to think she wouldn't answer. Her fingers traced idle patterns on the arm of her chair, her gaze distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because you saw me. Not the CEO, not the title or the salary or the corner office. Me. She looked up, meeting his eyes with startling directness. And I wanted to know if you meant it, or if it was just empty words. The vulnerability in her voice, the raw honesty of the admission, hit Marcus like a physical blow. He held her gaze, feeling something shift in the space between them. Some fundamental recalibration of how they understood each other and themselves. I meant every word. Rebecca stood abruptly, smoothing her blazer with practiced efficiency. The moment of vulnerability had passed, replaced by her usual professional armor. I have a board call in 10 minutes. We should probably end this here. Marcus rose as well, recognizing a dismissal when he heard one. But as he reached for the door handle, Rebecca spoke again. Marcus, he turned back. She was standing by the window again, silhouetted against the gray sky. Thank you for saying what no one else would. He nodded once, unsure how to respond, then stepped out into the hallway and let the door close behind him. His heart pounded in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the strange, unexpected connection that had just passed between them. He walked to the elevator in a daze, mind racing to process what had happened, what it meant, where it could possibly lead. The rain had stopped by the time Marcus reached the parking garage that evening. Lily would be at his mother's house until 7, which meant he had 2 hours to decompress before putting on his dad face again. He was halfway to his Honda when he heard a small voice echo through the concrete structure. Daddy! He spun around to see Lily running toward him, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Behind her, Margaret waved from her sedan. She insisted, his mother called out. Said she had to show you her turkey before it got wrinkled. Marcus knelt to catch Lily in his arms, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of crayons and graham crackers that somehow always clung to her. I thought I was picking you up at Grandma's. Lily pulled back, her expression serious beyond her years. I missed you, Daddy. Those words, so simple, so pure, hit him in a way that made his chest tight. After the day he'd had, after the confusion and fear and strange intimacy of that conference room, his daughter's uncomplicated love felt like an anchor to something real and solid. I missed you too, baby girl. They were walking toward his car when Lily suddenly stopped, her attention caught by something behind him. Marcus turned to see Rebecca Thorne emerging from the elevator, car keys in hand. She was out of her usual business attire, wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that made her look younger, softer, more approachable than he'd ever seen her. She hadn't noticed them yet, her eyes fixed on her phone as she walked, and Marcus felt a sudden urge to grab Lily and flee before this encounter could happen. But it was too late. Lily's small voice cut through the parking garage's ambient hum. Daddy, is that the lady from your picture? Marcus's brow furrowed. What picture? Lily looked up at him with innocent eyes. The one on your computer at home. The news picture you saved. You said she was very important. Blood rushed to Marcus's face. He vaguely remembered saving an article about Helix's quarterly earnings months ago, Rebecca's professional headshot prominently featured at the top. He'd kept it as reference, nothing more, but he hadn't realized Lily had seen it or remembered. His 6-year-old daughter had just revealed that he'd saved a picture of his CEO on his personal computer. Before he could respond, before he could pull Lily away or manufacture some explanation, she broke free from his grip and walked directly toward Rebecca. Excuse me, lady. Rebecca looked up, startled to find a 6-year-old standing in front of her. Her eyes flicked to Marcus, who was frozen in mortified horror, then back to Lily. Hello there. Lily beamed up at her with the fearless confidence of childhood. You're the lady my daddy talks about, right? The one he says is really strong, but looks sad sometimes. The parking garage fell absolutely silent. Marcus wished the concrete floor would open up and swallow him whole. But Rebecca didn't look angry. She crouched down to Lily's level, bringing herself eye to eye with the little girl, and her expression held something Marcus couldn't quite name. "Your daddy said that about me?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Uh-huh. He says you're the most important person at his work, and that you work really, really hard, and that he wishes he could make you smile more." Rebecca's composure cracked completely. For a moment, just a brief, unguarded moment, she looked like she might cry. Then she collected herself, offering Lily a gentle smile that transformed her entire face. "Your daddy sounds like a very kind man." Lily shrugged with the brutal honesty only children could deliver. "He's okay. He makes good pancakes, though." Marcus finally found his legs, closing the distance between them. "Lily, sweetie, we should let Miss Thorne get to her car. I'm sure she's very busy." Rebecca straightened, but her eyes stayed on Lily for another long moment before rising to meet Marcus's. "Actually, I'm not busy at all, for once." An awkward silence followed. The three of them stood in a loose triangle, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Marcus with his hand on Lily's shoulder, Rebecca with her keys still dangling from her fingers, and Lily looking between them with the knowing expression of a child who understood far more than adults gave her credit for. "Well," Rebecca's voice carried a warmth Marcus had never heard before. "It was lovely to meet you, Lily." Lily waved with both hands. "Bye, sad lady. I hope you smile more." Rebecca laughed, a genuine sound that echoed through the parking garage and seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised Marcus. "I'll work on it." She glanced at Marcus one more time, something unspoken passing between them in that brief moment of eye contact, then turned and walked toward her car. Marcus stood there holding Lily's hand, watching Rebecca disappear into the shadows of the parking structure, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath him in ways he couldn't begin to articulate. That night, after Lily was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with a beer he wasn't drinking, replaying the day's events in his mind. The accidental text, the forwarded conversation, the conference room meeting that had somehow become something else entirely, and then the parking garage, where his daughter had revealed truths he'd tried to keep hidden even from himself. His phone sat on the table, screen dark, silent. No new messages, nothing from Rebecca. But somehow Marcus knew with absolute certainty that something had changed. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences might still be coming, they'd passed some invisible threshold that afternoon. Two people who'd existed in separate worlds had collided, and the impact had left them both shaken in ways neither quite understood yet. Outside, Chicago settled into its nightly rhythm. Traffic sounds drifted up from the street. A siren wailed in the distance. Marcus picked up his phone, opened the message thread with David, and typed out a response he'd been avoiding all day. "Tomorrow, lunch, I'll explain everything." Then he set the phone down, finished his beer, and sat in the quiet darkness of his apartment, thinking about loneliness and connection, and the strange, terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only person in this city who understood what it meant to be seen. 2 days passed without contact. Marcus threw himself into work orders and system diagnostics, trying to convince himself that the conference room conversation had been a fluke, a strange moment of connection that would fade into professional distance like morning fog under sunlight. He replaced filters on the 19th floor, recalibrated thermostats in the West Tower, documented every mundane task with meticulous attention because focusing on the concrete and practical kept his mind from wandering to places it had no business going. Thursday evening, an email appeared in his inbox at 5:17. The subject line read simply, "Personnel discussion." The message was briefer still. "My office. 8 p.m. tonight. RT." Marcus stared at the screen, pulse accelerating. 8 o'clock was well past normal business hours, long after the executive assistants had gone home, long after witnesses would be around. He could ignore it, pretend he'd never seen the message, but that would only delay whatever was coming. At 7:45, he texted Margaret to let her know he'd be late, then rode the elevator to the 32nd floor with a sense of walking towards something inevitable and irreversible. The executive level had transformed in the evening light. Gone were the fluorescent overheads and bustling energy. Instead, warm lamplight spilled from Rebecca's corner office, casting long shadows across the empty hallway. Marcus knocked on the glass door, his reflection ghostly in the darkened glass. "Come in." He stepped inside and stopped short. The office had been rearranged. Two comfortable chairs had been pulled to face the window, angled toward each other in a way that suggested conversation rather than confrontation. A small table between them held two steaming cups topped with marshmallows, the rich smell of cocoa filling the space. Rebecca sat in one of the chairs, her shoes kicked off, her feet tucked beneath her in a posture that was entirely at odds with the commanding executive he'd seen from a distance for 3 years. "Close the door, please," Marcus did as she asked, moving cautiously toward the empty chair. The entire setup felt like stepping into someone's living room, rather than a corporate office, and the intimacy of it made him hyper-aware of every sound, the distant hum of the building systems, the faint whistle of wind against the windows, his own breathing. "This doesn't look like a personnel discussion." Rebecca's smile was slight but genuine. "It isn't. I just couldn't think of another way to get you up here without raising questions." She gestured to the cocoa. "I remembered you mentioning Lily likes hot chocolate. I assumed maybe you did too." The fact that she'd remembered such a small detail, that she'd thought about it enough to prepare this, left Marcus momentarily speechless. He wrapped his hands around the warm mug, the heat seeping into his palms. "You remembered that?" Rebecca shrugged, a surprisingly casual gesture. "I remember most things. It's a blessing and a curse." She was quiet for a moment, staring out at the city lights below, the Chicago skyline glittering in the darkness. Then she turned to face him fully. "I've been thinking about what you wrote, about me seeming lonely." Marcus tensed, but she held up a hand. "I'm not upset. I'm just trying to understand. Why did it bother you? We're not friends. We'd never had a real conversation before this week." It was a fair question, one Marcus had been asking himself since the whole mess began. He took a sip of cocoa, buying time to formulate an answer that wouldn't sound completely insane. "Because I know what it looks like. That particular kind of tired. The kind where you've convinced yourself that needing people is a weakness. That if you just work hard enough, you won't have time to notice that you're alone." He met her eyes. "I spent 3 years like that after my wife left. Working double shifts, taking every overtime slot I could get, telling myself it was for Lily. But really, it was because I couldn't stand the silence in my apartment." Rebecca's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded crossing her features. "And what changed?" Marcus set down his mug, the memory still sharp enough to cut. "Lily fell off a swing set while I was working late. Broke her arm. My mother called me from the emergency room, and I wasn't there." His voice roughened. "It took me 45 minutes to get there through traffic. Lily was crying for me the whole time, asking where Daddy was." He shook his head at the memory, at the shame that still burned when he thought about it. "That's when I realized that killing myself for money I didn't have time to spend wasn't protecting my daughter. It was abandoning her just like her mother did, just more slowly." The words hung in the air between them. Rebecca sat motionless, her fingers wrapped around her own mug, her gaze distant and troubled. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't have a Lily. No one to fall off a swing set and shock me out of it." She laughed, but the sound was hollow. "I'm not even sure what I'm working for anymore. The company doesn't need me the way it used to. The board could run things fine without me. But this office," she looked around at the expensive furniture, the wall of accolades, the view that most people would envy. "This is all I have." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "That's not true." Rebecca looked at him sharply. "You have tonight. You have this conversation. You have the fact that you reached out instead of pushing away." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I know I'm nobody. Facilities guy, single dad. Probably the last person you should be confiding in. But for what it's worth, I don't think you're as alone as you believe." The vulnerability on Rebecca's face was almost painful to witness. She looked younger in this light, stripped of her armor, just a woman in her early 40s who had given everything to her career and was only now realizing what it had cost her. "I was married once." The words came out quietly, as if she were testing how they sounded spoken aloud. "It lasted 4 years. He said I loved the company more than him." She smiled bitterly. "He wasn't wrong, but the company never disappointed me, never demanded things I couldn't give, never made me feel like I was failing at being human. She set down her mug, hands clasped in her lap. After the divorce, I told myself it was fine, that I was better off alone. But reading your messages, she trailed off, then started again. You called me lonely, and the worst part is that I couldn't even argue. The hour that followed felt suspended outside of normal time. They talked about everything and nothing, about Lily's latest obsession with dinosaurs, about Rebecca's hidden passion for terrible reality television, about the pressure of being the only person in a room who couldn't afford to show weakness. Marcus found himself speaking more honestly than he had with anyone in years, and Rebecca responded in kind, her professional facade crumbling with each shared confession. Somewhere between the second cup of cocoa and the clock striking 10, the barriers between them had dissolved entirely. When Rebecca finally walked him to the elevator, they stood in the empty hallway with the building silent around them. Thank you for coming tonight. I know it was strange. I know this whole week has been strange. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Strange good or strange bad? She considered the question, her expression thoughtful. Strange necessary, I think. I haven't talked to anyone like this in years, maybe ever. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Marcus stepped inside, then turned to face her. Same time tomorrow. He meant it as a joke mostly, but Rebecca's expression turned thoughtful. I'll send you an email. The doors closed between them, but Marcus knew with absolute certainty that the email would come. It became a pattern over the following week. Every evening at 8, Marcus would find his way to Rebecca's office or some other quiet corner of the building. Tuesday night, they met on the glass-enclosed walkway that connected the two towers, wind howling outside the reinforced panels, while they stood side by side watching the city spread out below. Wednesday, they returned to her office, where Rebecca showed him old photographs from a leather album she kept in her desk drawer, her parents, younger and smiling, standing in front of a modest house in downstate Illinois. My mother was a teacher. Dad worked at the Ford plant for 30 years. Rebecca's finger traced the edge of the photograph. They were so proud when I got into business school. Mom said, don't forget where you came from, Becca. But I did. I forgot on purpose because remembering hurt. It reminded me I had something to lose. Marcus found himself sharing things he'd never spoken about with anyone except David. He told her about Jennifer, about the morning she'd packed her bags while Lily slept, about the note she'd left that simply said she'd never wanted this life. He told her about the months afterward when he'd convinced himself that he'd trapped her, that her leaving was somehow his fault for not being enough. Rebecca listened without judgment, without offering empty platitudes or solutions. She simply heard him, and that act of witnessing felt more valuable than any advice could have been. Friday night found them back in her office, the city lights below creating a backdrop of scattered diamonds against black velvet. Rebecca poured them both wine from a bottle she'd been saving, she said, for some occasion that never seemed to arrive. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that felt like its own form of communication. When I sent that text to you by accident, Marcus stopped, gathering courage. The I miss you message. I wasn't just embarrassed afterward. I was angry at myself. Rebecca waited, giving him space to continue. Because part of me wished I'd meant to send it to you all along. 10 seconds of silence followed. Rebecca's breathing changed, her posture shifting almost imperceptibly. When she reached for his hand, the gesture felt both monumental and inevitable. No one has ever said they missed me, Marcus. Not my ex-husband, even when things were good. Not my parents before they died. I was always the responsible one, the achiever, the one who didn't need anything from anyone. Her voice cracked slightly. I've spent my whole life being strong, and I'm so tired of being alone. Marcus tightened his grip on her hand, feeling the tremor in her fingers. There were no words adequate to the moment, nothing he could say that wouldn't diminish the raw honesty of her confession. So instead, he simply held on, two people suspended in the darkness of an empty office building, the city humming with life 32 floors below. The accusations came on Monday. Marcus arrived at work to find his badge temporarily deactivated. The reader beeped red 3 times before security guard Jake looked up from his desk with an uncomfortable expression. Sorry, Marcus, HR flagged your credentials. You need to go to the 15th floor, conference room B. Ice flooded Marcus's veins. What? Why bye? Jake wouldn't meet his eyes. I don't know, man. Just following orders. The walk to the 15th floor felt like a death march. Other employees gave him curious glances as he passed, and Marcus wondered how many of them already knew something he didn't. Conference room B held 3 people when he entered. Helen Mosley, the HR director, along with 2 associates whose names he couldn't remember. Their expressions were professionally neutral in a way that made his stomach clench. Mr. Chen, please sit down. Marcus lowered himself into the chair across from them, hands gripping his knees to keep them from shaking. Helen slid a manila folder across the table. We've received a formal complaint alleging inappropriate conduct toward a senior executive. The words hit him like a physical blow. What? From who? The complaint was submitted anonymously. Helen's voice remained professionally flat. It alleges that you have been sending harassing messages to CEO Rebecca Thorne and manipulating your way into private meetings with her. Marcus's mind raced, trying to process what he was hearing. Someone had seen them. Someone had noticed the evening visits, the closed-door conversations, the emails back and forth, and they twisted it into something ugly and predatory. This is insane. I haven't harassed anyone. Miss Thorne invited me to those meetings. Check her calendar. Check her email. Helen's expression remained impassive. We're conducting a full investigation. In the meantime, you're being placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. Paid leave, but you are not to contact Miss Thorne or discuss this matter with any coworkers. You can't be serious. We're very serious, Mr. Chen. Please surrender your badge to security on your way out. The fluorescent lights suddenly felt too bright, the air too thin. Marcus stood on legs that didn't quite feel stable. How long? The investigation will take as long as necessary. We'll be in contact. Security escorted him to the parking garage, a humiliation that felt designed to maximize his shame. Coworkers stopped their conversations to stare as he passed. David tried to approach from across the lobby, concern written across his face, but the security guard stepped between them with a firm shake of his head. In his car, Marcus sat with his hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed. Nawasan Bosch, Margaret asking if he could pick up Lily early. He texted back that he'd be there in 20 minutes, then sat in the dim parking structure trying to gather himself enough to face his daughter without falling apart. Lily knew something was wrong the moment she saw him. Children had radar for parental distress, some sixth sense that picked up on the invisible cues adults thought they were hiding. She climbed into his lap when they got home, wrapping her small arms around his neck. Did you do something bad, Daddy? Marcus held her tight, breathing in the scent of crayons and graham crackers that clung to her hair. No, baby. But sometimes people think things that aren't true, and we have to be patient while they figure it out. Grandma says the truth always comes out. Grandma's right, but sitting there with his daughter in his arms, Marcus wasn't sure he believed it. Truth had a way of getting buried under politics and power dynamics and the need to protect institutional reputation. He was nobody, a facilities manager with no connections and no leverage. If the investigation went badly, he'd lose everything. The job that fed his daughter, the health insurance that covered her checkups, the stability he'd fought so hard to build after Jennifer left. Tuesday brought interviews. HR called David, who confirmed that Marcus had never mentioned anything inappropriate, but admitted he'd been acting secretive lately. They interviewed Patricia, who acknowledged that Rebecca had scheduled the meetings herself, but emphasized how unusual the arrangement had been. CEO doesn't meet with facilities managers alone, she told them, her tone suggesting impropriety even as her words technically defended him. Marcus spent the day at home, fielding calls from his mother, while Lily played with her dinosaurs in the living room. Margaret wanted to know what had happened, wanted to understand why her son was suddenly unemployed. He gave her the broad strokes, leaving out the parts about late-night conversations and shared vulnerabilities, and the way his hand had fit perfectly in Rebecca's. This doesn't sound right, Marcus. You've never been anything but professional. I know, Mom, but perception matters more than reality sometimes. Wednesday afternoon, Rebecca learned about the investigation. Patricia had tried to shield her from it initially, following protocol about maintaining the integrity of the inquiry, But by midday, the rumors had spread widely enough that keeping her in the dark became impossible. Patricia found Rebecca in her office reviewing quarterly projections, knocked twice, and entered without waiting for permission. "We need to talk. There's a situation." Rebecca looked up, immediately reading the tension in her assistant's posture. "What kind of situation?" "Marcus Chen. There's been a complaint. Harassment allegations." The words took a moment to register. When they did, Rebecca's face went pale, then flushed with fury. "When did this start?" "Monday morning. I was told not to inform you immediately because you're named as the alleged victim, and they needed to establish facts before—" "I'm the victim?" Rebecca stood, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "And no one thought to ask the alleged victim if any of this actually happened?" Patricia took a step back. "I'm just telling you what HR said, ma'am." Rebecca grabbed her phone, jaw clenched. "Get Helen Mosley on the line, now." The call lasted 3 minutes. Rebecca spent most of it listening, her expression growing colder with each passing second. When she finally spoke, her words were precise and lethal. "I'll be in your office in 15 minutes. Have the full file ready." She ended the call and looked at Patricia. "Cancel everything this afternoon. And I mean everything." 15 minutes later, Rebecca strode into Helen Mosley's office without knocking. Helen stood from behind her desk, clearly prepared for confrontation. But Rebecca's opening salvo gave her no time to establish control. "Why wasn't I informed immediately that someone filed a harassment complaint in my name? Protocol requires that we establish preliminary facts before involving principals who might be what? Lying? Covering up?" Rebecca's voice could have cut glass. "I'm the CEO of this company, Helen. More importantly, I'm supposedly the victim in this complaint. And nobody thought to ask me if Marcus Chen had done anything wrong." Helen gestured to a chair, but Rebecca remained standing, arms crossed. The complaint was anonymous. It alleged inappropriate contact, manipulation of access, use of his daughter to gain sympathy, all of which is complete fabrication. Rebecca leaned forward, palms flat on Helen's head. "I invited Marcus to those meetings, every single one. I initiated every conversation. If anyone manipulated access, it was me. Miss Thorne, I understand you may feel protective, but we have to investigate all claims thoroughly. Then investigate this claim. Whoever filed that complaint is lying. They're trying to destroy a good man because they don't like seeing me talk to someone below their arbitrary status threshold." Helen's expression shifted slightly, professional armor cracking. "You're saying there was no harassment?" "I'm saying Marcus Chen treated me with more respect and honesty than anyone else in this building. He saw me as a human being rather than a title. And if that's a fireable offense, then maybe we need to examine what kind of company we've become." The silence that followed felt weighted with significance. Helen sat down slowly, reaching for a legal pad. "I need to document this conversation. For the record, you're stating that Marcus Chen did not harass you in any way." "Correct. And that you initiated contact?" "Yes. And there was no abuse of power or coercion." Rebecca's laugh was sharp. "Helen, I'm the CEO. Well, if anyone had power in those interactions, it was me. Marcus risked his job by being honest with me. The least I can do is tell the truth about what happened." Helen made notes, her pen scratching across paper. "I'll need to present this to the investigation team. Given your statement, I can lift the administrative leave, but the inquiry will need to continue. You have 48 hours, and I want to know who filed that complaint. Anonymous complaints are meant to protect. I don't care what they're meant to protect. Someone tried to destroy an innocent man's livelihood and reputation. That person doesn't deserve anonymity. They deserve consequences." Thursday morning, Marcus received a call from HR informing him that his badge had been reactivated and he could return to work. The relief lasted approximately 30 seconds before the reality sank in. He'd have to walk back into that building, knowing everyone had heard the accusations, knowing they'd all formed opinions about him and Rebecca and what might have happened in those evening meetings. He arrived at 8:15 to find the facilities department unusually quiet. Conversations stopped when he entered. People found sudden interest in their computer screens. David materialized at his cubicle within minutes, dropping into the guest chair with visible relief. "Man, I've been going crazy. Are you okay?" What happened? Marcus filled him in on the basics, the complaint, the investigation, Rebecca's intervention. David listened with growing anger. That's bullshit. You didn't do anything wrong. Tell that to everyone else in this building. Who filed the complaint? Do they know? Marcus shook his head. Anonymous, but whoever it was either saw us together or heard rumors and decided to weaponize them. David's expression darkened. I have theories. Don't. It doesn't matter who. What matters is that I'm back and I need to keep my head down and my nose clean. But keeping his head down proved impossible. The whispers followed him through the building, conversations that stopped when he entered rooms, sidelong glances from people who'd never paid attention to him before. By lunchtime, Marcus felt like he was walking through a minefield where every step might trigger an explosion. At 2:30, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mechanical room, 18th floor, 3 o'clock. Marcus stared at the screen, heart hammering. They'd been explicitly told not to contact each other during the investigation. Meeting now would be reckless at best, career-ending at worst. But Rebecca had risked her own position to defend him, had stood up to HR and demanded his reinstatement. He couldn't leave her waiting. The mechanical room on 18 was tucked behind a heavy steel door at the end of a service corridor. The space hummed with the building's circulatory systems, HVAC units, electrical panels, the guts of the infrastructure that kept Helix Technologies running. Marcus was checking a pressure gauge when he heard heels clicking on concrete. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, still in full CEO armor, black suit, hair pulled back, expression carefully neutral. But her eyes betrayed her, carrying an intensity that made Marcus's breath catch. I needed to see you to make sure you were okay. I'm fine, thanks to you. I only told the truth. She moved closer, glancing around to confirm they were alone. Marcus, I'm sorry. This is my fault. I put you in this position by asking you to those meetings, You didn't do anything wrong, neither did I. Someone else decided to make it into something it wasn't. Rebecca's jaw tightened. I'm going to find out who, and when I do, it doesn't matter. Marcus surprised himself with the conviction in his voice. Whoever filed that complaint, they were probably trying to protect you. Thought they were saving you from making a mistake. They're not important. What's important is that we both survived it. I don't want to just survive, Marcus. She stopped herself, but the unfinished sentence hung between them like a physical presence. Marcus set down his tools, heart pounding. What do you want? Rebecca stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, feel the warmth radiating from her body. Could you lean down? I can't reach your ear in these heels. Confused but compliant, Marcus bent toward her. Rebecca rose on her toes, her lips nearly brushing his ear, and whispered 4 words that stopped his heart. I miss you too. He froze. The mechanical room hummed around them, but Marcus heard none of it. His entire world had narrowed to those 4 words and the woman who had spoken them. He straightened slowly, meeting her eyes, and found them bright with unshed tears and something else. Hope, fear, determination all tangled together. I know it's complicated. Power dynamics, office politics, the fact that I'm probably the worst candidate for any kind of relationship in this entire city. The words tumbled out of her in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for days and couldn't contain them anymore. But I can't stop thinking about you, about our conversations, about the way you actually see me, not the job title or the corner office or the salary, but me. She swallowed hard. And I needed you to know. Even if you don't feel the same way, even if this ruins everything, I needed to say it out loud. Marcus stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, his mind racing but his heart having made its decision long ago. Probably that first night in her office, maybe even earlier, in the parking garage when Lily had called her the sad lady. I feel the same way. I've felt it since the first time you laughed at something I said. Since the first time you talked about yourself like a real person instead of a job title. Since Lily told you that you look sad and you actually listened. Rebecca's breath caught. Marcus. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with trembling fingers. We'll figure out the complicated parts. The politics, the appearances, all of it. But not right now. Right now, I just need you to know that you're not alone anymore. Neither of us are. They stood there in the dim mechanical room with machinery humming around them and the weight of the decision they'd just made settling over them like a second skin. When Rebecca finally left, slipping out first to avoid being seen together, Marcus remained behind for another 10 minutes, hands shaking as he tried to process what had happened, what it meant, where it could possibly lead. Everything had changed, not just between them, but in how Marcus understood his own life, his own capacity for risk and hope, and the terrifying vulnerability of letting someone see him completely. He'd spent 4 years building walls around himself and Lily, creating a fortress of routine and responsibility that kept the world at a safe distance. And in the space of 2 weeks, Rebecca Thorne had walked through every defense he'd constructed, not by force, but by the simple act of being equally vulnerable, equally desperate for connection. That evening, he picked up Lily from Margaret's house and drove home through twilight traffic, his daughter chattering about her day, while Marcus's mind replayed Rebecca's whispered confession on an endless loop. When they got home, Lily wanted to watch her favorite dinosaur documentary, so they settled on the couch together, her small body warm against his side. Halfway through, during a segment about pterodactyls, Lily looked up at him with those two knowing eyes. "Daddy, is Miss Rebecca your girlfriend?" Marcus nearly choked on his water. "What? Why would you think that?" "Because you smile different when you talk about her, like Grandma smiles when she talks about Grandpa." Margaret's husband had died when Marcus was 12, but his mother still spoke of him with a tenderness that time hadn't diminished. The comparison made Marcus's chest tight. "Miss Rebecca is my friend, baby girl. A good friend." Lily considered this, then nodded as if it confirmed something she'd already suspected. "I like her. She has sad eyes, but they get happy when she sees you." Children saw truth that adults spent years learning to ignore. Marcus kissed the top of Lily's head, watching animated dinosaurs soar across the screen, and wondered how his 6-year-old daughter had become wiser than him about matters of the heart. Friday brought the revelation. Ad Services, as part of the broader investigation, had traced the origin of the anonymous complaint. The email had been sent from an internal network, from a computer on the 31st floor, the executive level, 1 floor below Rebecca's office. The user credentials belonged to Mitchell Bradford, VP of Operations, a man who'd been passed over for promotion twice and harbored ambitions toward the CEO position that everyone knew about but nobody mentioned. Rebecca learned this from Patricia at 4 in the afternoon. She sat very still as her assistant explained what it had found, her expression going from neutral to coldly furious in the span of seconds. "Get Mitchell in my office, now." "Miss Thorne, perhaps you should involve legal before—" "Now, Patricia." Mitchell Bradford arrived 15 minutes later, his confident stride faltering when he saw Rebecca's expression. She didn't invite him to sit, didn't offer any of the usual corporate pleasantries. She simply stared at him until the silence became uncomfortable, then spoke with lethal precision. "I know it was you." Mitchell's face went carefully blank. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're referring to." "The harassment complaint against Marcus Chen. It traced it back to your computer. Your login credentials. Your IP address." Rebecca stood, walking around her desk to face him directly. "You filed a false report accusing an innocent man of harassment because you saw an opportunity to undermine me." Mitchell's mask slipped slightly, a flash of something ugly crossing his features. "Rebecca, think about what you're doing. Dating a maintenance worker, the board will lose confidence. I was protecting the company's reputation, protecting your position. You were protecting your ambition." Rebecca's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more menacing. "You saw me connecting with someone you deemed beneath my status, and you decided to destroy him to prove a point. To remind me that CEOs don't fraternize with the help. He's a facilities manager, Rebecca. You're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. People are talking. The optics are terrible. Marcus Chen is worth 10 of you. He's honest, hardworking, and he sees people as human beings rather than rungs on a career ladder." Rebecca picked up her phone. "Clean out your desk. You're terminated, effective immediately." Mitchell's composure cracked. "You can't fire me over this. The board won't support you. They'll side with me when they understand I was trying to protect the company from scandal. Try me. I have documentation of your false accusations. I have ad logs. I have witness statements. Rebecca's smile was sharp enough to cut. And I'm calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow. You're welcome to attend and explain to them why you thought destroying an employee's reputation was acceptable corporate behavior. Mitchell opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. The calculation was visible on his face, weighing his options, measuring his chance, finding them all wanting. He turned and left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway with the finality of a door slamming shut. Rebecca stood alone in her office afterward, hands shaking with residual adrenaline. She'd just fired a VP without consulting legal or HR, without building a proper case through official channels. The board would have questions. Some of them would be angry, but she'd meant every word she'd said to Mitchell. Marcus Chen was worth defending, worth fighting for, worth the political capital this battle would cost her. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you. I heard what you did." Rebecca smiled despite herself, typing back quickly. "How did you hear? David's girlfriend works in legal. Word travels fast. Are you okay?" "Better than okay. Can I see you tonight?" Rebecca glanced at her calendar, at the stack of work waiting for her attention, at all the reasons saying yes was complicated and potentially reckless. Then she thought about Marcus's hand in hers, about the way he looked at her like she was a person rather than a position, about Lily calling her the sad lady and being absolutely right. "My place. 8 o'clock. I'll send you the address." She sent the text before she could second-guess herself, then sat down and began drafting talking points for tomorrow's board meeting. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences came from standing up to Mitchell and defending Marcus, she would face them head-on. For the first time in 6 years, she had something worth fighting for beyond quarterly earnings and market share. And that, Rebecca realized, made all the difference. Rebecca's apartment occupied the 42nd floor of a converted warehouse building in River North, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. Marcus stood in the lobby at 7:55, acutely aware that he was wearing his best jeans and a button-down shirt that suddenly felt inadequate for the neighborhood's obvious wealth. The doorman had called up to announce him with a deference that made Marcus uncomfortable, and now he rode the elevator alone, watching the numbers climb while his pulse did the same. The doors opened directly into her apartment, a private elevator, because of course it was. Rebecca stood waiting in the open living space beyond, wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater that made her look younger and somehow more vulnerable than her corporate armor ever did. Her hair was down, falling loose around her shoulders, and her feet were bare on the polished concrete floor. "You found it okay?" Marcus nodded, stepping out into the space and trying not to stare. The apartment was beautiful in a stark, minimalist way. Expensive furniture arranged with precision, abstract art on the walls, everything perfectly curated and utterly impersonal. It looked like a showroom, like a space designed to impress rather than to live in. Rebecca followed his gaze, reading his thoughts with uncomfortable accuracy. "It's cold, isn't it? I hired a decorator 5 years ago and never changed anything. Sometimes I forget what I actually like versus what someone told me would look good." She moved toward the kitchen, which occupied one corner of the open space. "Wine? I have a Pinot Noir that's supposed to be excellent, though I have no idea if that's true. I just buy whatever the sommelier recommends." "Wine sounds good." Marcus crossed to the windows while Rebecca poured, looking out at the river below, the lights of the city reflecting off dark water. His entire apartment could probably fit in this single room. The disparity between their lives had never felt more tangible, more impossible to bridge. "I know what you're thinking." He turned to find Rebecca holding 2 glasses, her expression rueful, "that were from different worlds. That this," she gestured around the apartment, "is proof that whatever we're trying to do can't work." Am I that transparent? No, I'm just intimately familiar with the argument because I've been making it to myself all week. She handed him a glass, their fingers brushing. "But then I remember that this apartment, this view, all of it, I'd trade it in a heartbeat for what you have with Lily, for someone who looks at me the way your daughter looks at you, for feeling like I matter to another human being beyond what I can produce or provide." Rebecca moved to the couch, curling into one corner, and Marcus joined her, maintaining careful distance even as every instinct urged him closer. Mitchell was right about one thing. The board is going to have questions. Rebecca's voice was steady, but Marcus heard the undercurrent of tension. Tomorrow's meeting won't be pleasant. Gerald Hutchins has been looking for reasons to push me out since I opposed his IPO timeline. This gives him ammunition. What do they want? For me to transfer somewhere? Quit? They want me to choose career or personal life, success or happiness, as if those things are mutually exclusive. Rebecca took a long sip of wine. I've spent 12 years at Helix, 7 as CFO, 5 as CEO. I've given everything to that company. And now they're going to ask me if I'm willing to throw it all away for... She stopped, the unfinished sentence hanging between them. For a facilities manager with a 6-year-old daughter in a Honda with 200,000 miles on it. Rebecca's eyes met his, fierce and determined. For the first person in a decade who makes me feel like a human being instead of a quarterly earnings report. Marcus set down his wine glass with deliberate care. I can transfer. I facilities coordinator, same building but different reporting structure. David mentioned they've been looking to fill that position. It solves the power dynamic issue without anyone having to sacrifice their career. You do that? Move departments? Rebecca, I fix air conditioners and calibrate thermostats. I can do that from any department in the building. But you built Helix. You can't just walk away from that because some board members have outdated ideas about appropriate relationships. She studied him for a long moment, something unreadable crossing her features. Most men would want me to choose them, to prove they matter more than my work. Most men didn't grow up watching their mother work 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads after their father left. I know what it means to build something, to fight for security and stability. I won't ask you to give that up, Rebecca. Not for me. Not for anyone. The distance between them closed without Marcus being entirely sure who moved first. Rebecca's hand found his, her fingers lacing through his with a rightness that felt like inevitability. They sat like that for a while, not speaking, just existing in the same space without the weight of professional boundaries or corporate politics pressing down on them. Tell me something true. Rebecca's voice was barely above a whisper. Something you've never told anyone else. Marcus thought about deflecting, about offering some safe revelation that wouldn't expose too much. But Rebecca had been brave enough to risk everything for honesty, and she deserved the same in return. Sometimes I'm terrified that Lily will grow up and realize her father is ordinary, that she'll look at what I do, where I live, who I am, and feel disappointed. Jennifer left because she wanted more than I could give her. What if Lily decides the same thing someday? Rebecca's hand tightened around his. That's not ordinary, Marcus. That's love. And someday Lily will understand that the man who showed up for her every single day, who put her needs above his own fears, who taught her that worth isn't measured in job titles or bank accounts. That man gave her something more valuable than any amount of money or status could provide. The conviction in her voice made Marcus's throat tight. He turned to look at her, really look at her, and saw reflected back his own longing for connection, for understanding, for someone to witness the fullness of who he was, rather than just the role he played. Your turn? Tell me something true. Rebecca's laugh was brittle. I have board meetings with 9 people who control my professional fate, and I couldn't tell you which of them I'd call in an emergency. I have 2,000 employees who depend on me for their livelihoods, and not one of them knows that I cry sometimes in my office after everyone's gone home. She paused, swallowing hard. I'm 42 years old, and the last time someone hugged me, really hugged me, not the corporate half-embrace at networking events, was 3 years ago at my mother's funeral. Marcus didn't hesitate. He pulled her into his arms, feeling her stiffen briefly before melting against him, her face pressed into his shoulder. She didn't cry, but her breathing hitched in a way that suggested tears being forcibly held back. They stayed like that for long minutes, Rebecca's body warm against his, the city lights glittering beyond the windows. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were bright but dry, her professional armor reasserting itself even as she remained in the circle of his arms. The board meets at 9 tomorrow. Whatever happens, whatever they decide. Thank you for tonight, for making me feel less alone, Marcus wanted to argue, to insist that this was just the beginning rather than a premature goodbye. But he recognized the fear in her voice. The lifetime of learning that good things didn't last, that vulnerability led to pain. So instead, he simply held her until the clock struck midnight and the day ahead loomed with all its uncertainties and potential consequences. The emergency board meeting convened in the conference room on the 35th floor. 9 people arranged around a table designed to seat 20. Rebecca sat at the head, her expression carefully neutral as Gerald Hutchins opened with barely veiled hostility. "Rebecca, we need to address the situation with the facilities manager. The harassment complaint, the investigation, your personal involvement, it's created exactly the kind of distraction this company can't afford." There was no harassment. The complaint was false, filed by Mitchell Bradford as a means of undermining my authority. Mitchell has been terminated for cause. Gerald's eyebrows rose. "You fired a VP without consulting this board?" "I fired an employee who filed false accusations in an attempt to damage another employee's reputation. That's within my authority as CEO. If you'd like to challenge that decision, we can review the documentation." Sarah Kim, the only board member who'd consistently supported Rebecca, leaned forward. "I'd like to see that documentation. False harassment claims are serious." Rebecca distributed folders containing IT logs, witness statements, and a timeline of events. The board members read in silence, Gerald's expression growing progressively darker. "Fine. Mitchell acted inappropriately, but that doesn't address the underlying issue." Gerald closed the folder with audible force. "You've been meeting privately with a subordinate employee. That creates liability, Rebecca. Perception problems, questions about judgment. Marcus Chen is moving to a different department, IT Facilities Coordinator, reporting directly to Thomas Wu. There will be no power dynamic or reporting relationship." "That's not enough," Gerald's voice hardened. "The optics are still damaging. CEO pursuing a relationship with someone so far below her station. It undermines confidence in your judgment, makes investors question whether you're focused on the business or your personal life." Rebecca felt her composure slip slightly, anger flaring hot in her chest. "I've delivered 5 consecutive years of growth exceeding projections. I've expanded into 3 new markets. I've increased valuation by over $2 billion. My personal life has never interfered with my professional responsibilities. Yet here we are, having an emergency meeting about your relationship choices." Gerald looked around the table, gauging support. "I move that we recommend Mrs. Thorne take a leave of absence pending a full review of her conduct." "I second." The voice came from Thomas Brennan, a board member who'd always seemed neutral until this moment. Sarah's hands slapped the table. "This is ridiculous. Rebecca's done nothing wrong. She's been honest, transparent, and she's handled a difficult situation with integrity. Punishing her for having a personal life sets a precedent that will drive away every talented executive we hope to recruit. It's not punishment. It's recognizing that leadership requires sacrifice, including the sacrifice of relationships that create conflicts of interest or appearance problems." Gerald's smile was thin. "Unless Miss Thorne would like to propose an alternative solution." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Rebecca could fight, could refuse the leave of absence, and force a vote that might split the board. But fighting meant drama, meant headlines, meant exactly the kind of distraction that could actually damage Helix. The other option, ending things with Marcus before they had really begun, sat in her chest like a stone. "I have an alternative," Rebecca's voice cut through the rising tension. "I call an all-company meeting Monday morning. I explain the situation transparently to all employees, and I let them decide whether my personal life affects my ability to lead effectively." The board member stared at her. Gerald recovered first, his expression shifting from satisfaction to wariness. "You want to air this publicly?" "I want to stop pretending that executives aren't human beings with lives and feelings and relationships. I want to acknowledge that I've found someone who matters to me and that this doesn't diminish my commitment to Helix. And yes, I want to let the people who actually work with me every day weigh in on whether my judgment has been compromised." "That's unprecedented." Thomas Brennan looked genuinely shocked. "You'd be gambling your entire career on honesty, on transparency, on the radical notion that maybe we can stop forcing women to choose between professional success and personal happiness. Rebecca met each board member's eyes in turn. I'm tired of living by rules designed to keep people isolated and controllable. If that means risking everything, then so be it. Sarah's smile was fierce. I support this approach. Let's see what the company thinks. The vote that followed wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. 6 board members approved Rebecca's plan, with Gerald and 2 others voting against. As the meeting adjourned, Gerald approached Rebecca with barely contained fury. You're making a mistake. The employees will turn on you when they realize you're willing to jeopardize the company for a man you barely know. Or they'll recognize that I'm finally being authentic about who I am and what I value. Either way, it's my risk to take. Gerald's parting shot was delivered with venomous precision. Just remember, when this blows up in your face that you chose him over your life's work, I hope he's worth it. After he left, Sarah lingered. That took courage. Probably also insanity, but definitely courage. Did I just commit career suicide? Maybe, or maybe you just reminded everyone that CEOs are people too. Sarah squeezed Rebecca's shoulder. Either way, I'll be there Monday morning. Rebecca left the building through the parking garage, needing air and distance before she could face her office again. She found Marcus waiting by her car, leaning against the concrete pillar, and the relief that flooded through her at the sight of him was almost overwhelming. You heard? David's girlfriend strikes again. Rebecca, you didn't have to do that. Risk everything for... Yes, I did. She closed the distance between them, not caring who might see. Because you were right when you said we'd figure out the complicated parts. But I'm not willing to figure them out by hiding or pretending this doesn't matter. It matters, Marcus. You matter. And I'm done apologizing for that. Marcus pulled her into his arms, and Rebecca let herself lean into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. They stood like that in the dim parking garage, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and logic, holding on while the world shifted around them. Monday morning arrived with the weight of an execution. The company auditorium filled slowly, 2,000 employees trickling in with curious expressions and whispered speculation. Video links connected remote offices in 3 cities. Marcus watched from the back row, David beside him, both of them tense with anticipation. Rebecca took the stage at precisely 10 o'clock, no notes in hand, just her and a microphone, and the full attention of everyone who worked for Helix Technologies. She looked smaller somehow, without a podium to hide behind, more human and more vulnerable than Marcus had ever seen her in a professional context. I've been your CEO for 5 years. Before that, I served as CFO for 7 years. In that time, we've grown from a $200 million company to a valuation of $2.3 billion. We've expanded to 12 cities, hired 1,500 new employees, and revolutionized how businesses approach cloud infrastructure. Her voice carried across the silent auditorium. And in those 12 years, I lost myself. I worked until midnight every night. I ate lunch alone at my desk. I came in on holidays and weekends. I told myself this was dedication, was leadership, was what success required. Rebecca paused, and Marcus saw her hands tremble slightly before she steadied them. But really, I was just scared. Scared of being human, of needing people, of admitting that maybe building an empire wasn't enough to make me happy. Murmurs rippled through the audience. This was not the Rebecca Thorne they knew, the Ice Queen CEO who ran board meetings with ruthless efficiency and never showed weakness. 4 weeks ago, I received an accidental text message from Marcus Chen, our facilities manager. That message led to conversations. Those conversations led to friendship. And that friendship became something more. She gestured toward the back of the room, and 2,000 heads turned to look at Marcus, who felt his face flush hot with sudden attention. Someone filed a false harassment complaint to destroy what Marcus and I were building, and that person has been terminated. But the incident raised questions about judgment, about propriety, about whether a CEO can have a personal life that includes someone who doesn't fit conventional expectations of status or power. Rebecca's voice strengthened. The board gave me a choice: take a leave of absence or prove that my personal happiness doesn't compromise my professional effectiveness. So I'm asking you, all of you who work with me, who see me every day, who know what kind of leader I am. Does the fact that I've found someone who makes me happy affect my ability to do this job?" Silence followed, heavy and expectant. Then Patricia stood up from the front row, and the shock of seeing the executive assistant on her feet rippled through the room. In 8 years working for Ms. Thorne, I've never seen her this engaged with staff. She knows people's names now. She asks about their families. She's more present, more connected, more human. Patricia's voice carried clearly. Whatever she's doing differently, it's working. She's a better leader now than she was 6 months ago. David jumped to his feet in the back row. "Marcus Chen is the best man I know. He's honest, hardworking, and he treats everyone with respect regardless of their position. If he and Ms. Thorne found something real together, that's worth celebrating, not condemning." More people stood: a software engineer from the 15th floor, an HR associate who'd worked on the investigation, a project manager who'd been with Helix since the beginning. One by one, employees rose to their feet, applause starting slowly and then building into a wave that filled the auditorium with sound. Marcus found himself standing too, tears pricking his eyes as he watched Rebecca's professional armor crack completely, watched her press one hand to her mouth as the ovation continued. She looked for him across the crowd, their eyes meeting, and the gratitude in her expression made his chest tight. When the applause finally faded, Rebecca's voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you, all of you. I don't know what happens next, but I know I'm not going to hide anymore. Not from who I am, not from what I need, and not from the possibility that maybe we can all be a little more human in how we treat each other." She left the stage to another wave of applause, but instead of exiting through the back where executives usually departed, she walked straight down the center aisle toward Marcus. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The CEO crossing the distance that separated her from the man who'd changed everything, meeting him in the middle ground where their different worlds intersected. Marcus met her halfway, aware of thousands of eyes watching, no longer caring. When Rebecca reached him, she didn't offer a corporate handshake or maintain professional distance. She simply took his hand, lacing their fingers together, and spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. "Whatever happens now, we face it together." Together. Marcus squeezed her hand, feeling the tremor in her fingers, knowing his own hands were equally unsteady. Though for the record, that was either the bravest or most reckless thing I've ever witnessed. Probably both. Rebecca's smile was shaky but genuine. "I have about 6 board members who want my head, several major investors questioning my sanity, and absolutely no plan for what comes next. But I also have this." She lifted their joined hands. "And right now, that feels more valuable than any amount of corporate approval." The crowd began dispersing, employees returning to their desks with animated conversations and backward glances. David approached with his characteristic grin, though Marcus could see the concern beneath it. "Well, you two certainly know how to make things interesting. The Slack channels are melting down. HR is probably having a collective aneurysm. And I'm pretty sure I just watched corporate history being made." Patricia appeared beside them, her usually stern expression softened with something that might have been approval. "So, Thorne, you have 17 interview requests from business media. The board would like to reconvene this afternoon, and your calendar is completely destroyed for the rest of the day. Cancel everything except the board meeting." And Patricia? Rebecca met her assistant's eyes. "Thank you for what you said up there. I only spoke the truth, ma'am. You're better now than you were. Happier, more present. That's worth fighting for." The following days unfolded in a blur of consequences and adjustments. Marcus officially transferred to the IT facilities coordinator position, a lateral move that eliminated any reporting relationship with Rebecca while keeping him in the same building. The gossip continued but shifted from scandalous to curious, employees watching their interactions with interest rather than judgment. Gerald Hutchins resigned from the board in protest, taking one other member with him. Sarah Kim was elected interim board chair, immediately proposing revisions to the company's fraternization policy that acknowledged employees as adults capable of managing their own relationships. 2 major investors expressed concerns about leadership stability, but 3 others praised Rebecca's transparency and authenticity as exactly the kind of modern leadership they wanted to support. The business media had a field day. CEO goes public with relationship competed with breaking corporate taboos, empower couple, or PR disaster for headline space. Rebecca gave exactly one interview, stating simply that she refused to apologize for finding happiness and that Helix's numbers would speak for themselves. 3 months later, Marcus stood in his mother's kitchen, helping prepare Thanksgiving dinner while Lily colored at the table. Margaret worked beside him, seasoning the turkey with practiced efficiency, but he could feel her sideways glances, sense the questions she'd been holding back. So, Rebecca what, Mom? Is it serious? What you two have? Marcus thought about morning coffees before work, about stolen lunch hours walking along the river, about evenings in Rebecca's apartment where they'd finally started making the space feel lived in rather than staged. He thought about the way Lily had taken to calling her Miss Rebecca without prompting, about how Rebecca had shown up to Lily's school play without being asked and sat in the audience looking more nervous than any 6-year-old's performance warranted. Yeah, Mom, it's serious. Margaret nodded, satisfied. Good. She makes you smile again. Really smile, not that fake thing you've been doing since Jennifer left. Is it that obvious? To your mother? Always. She paused in her seasoning, turning to face him fully. You deserve this, Marcus. Happiness, love, someone who sees you for who you are. Don't let fear or pride or what other people think talk you out of it. The doorbell rang before Marcus could respond. He went to answer it, finding Rebecca on the porch holding a bakery box and looking uncharacteristically nervous. I know I'm early. I can wait in the car if... Get in here before you freeze. Marcus pulled her inside, taking the box and kissing her forehead in one smooth motion. What did you bring? Pumpkin pie. The bakery assured me it's excellent, though I have no basis for comparison. I've never actually made Thanksgiving dinner before. Lily came running from the kitchen, crashing into Rebecca's legs with enthusiastic force. Miss Rebecca, you came. Did you know turkeys can't really fly even though they have wings? I learned that at school. Rebecca crouched down, bringing herself to Lily's eye level with the ease of someone who'd been practicing. I did not know that. Tell me more about these flightless turkeys. Marcus watched them together, his daughter chattering about avian biology with 6-year-old authority, Rebecca listening with genuine interest and asking follow-up questions that made Lily glow with importance. Margaret appeared in the kitchen doorway, flour on her hands, and caught his eye with a knowing smile. Dinner was chaotic in the way family gatherings always were. Too much food, overlapping conversations, Lily's detailed explanation of her latest school project that somehow took 20 minutes to describe. Rebecca fit into the chaos like she'd always been there, helping Margaret with dishes, while Marcus got Lily ready for bed, asking about family recipes and laughing at stories from Marcus's childhood. Later, after Lily was asleep and Margaret had retired to her room, Marcus and Rebecca sat on the porch wrapped in blankets against the November cold. The neighborhood was quiet, houses lit from within, the occasional car passing on the street. Thank you for inviting me today. Rebecca's voice was soft. I haven't had a real Thanksgiving in years. Usually I just work through it. You're welcome here anytime. Lily's already planning your Christmas attendance. Fair warning. Something about helping decorate cookies. Rebecca laughed, the sound warm in the cold air. I'd like that, all of it. The cookies, the chaos, being part of something bigger than quarterly earnings and board meetings. Marcus pulled her closer, feeling her settle against his side. You know people are going to keep talking. Keep questioning whether this makes sense, whether we make sense. Let them talk. I spent too many years worrying about perception, about maintaining perfect control over how people saw me. Rebecca tilted her head back to look at the stars barely visible through Chicago's light pollution. You taught me that being seen, really seen, flaws and fears and all, is worth more than any carefully constructed image. I didn't teach you that. You already knew it. You just needed permission to admit it. Maybe, or maybe we both needed someone brave enough to send an accidental text message and honest enough to follow through on what it revealed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their breath form clouds in the cold air. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that panicked moment in Lily's doorway to this quiet contentment on his mother's porch. It hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been investigations and accusations, board meetings, and public declarations. Countless moments of doubt and fear. But underneath all the complications ran a simple truth. Two lonely people had found each other, had chosen to be brave enough to reach across the distance that separated their worlds, had decided that connection mattered more than convention. I love you. The words slipped out before Marcus could second-guess them, carried on a cloud of frozen breath. Rebecca went very still beside him. Then she turned, her eyes searching his face in the porch light, and her smile was like sunrise. I love you too. I've wanted to say it for weeks, but I kept waiting for the right moment, the perfect timing. She laughed at herself, as if love follows corporate protocols and scheduled announcements. Marcus kissed her, tasting her smile, feeling her cold nose against his cheek. When they pulled apart, Rebecca was crying, not sad tears, but the kind that came from relief, from finally admitting something that had been building for months. Lily asked me yesterday if you were going to be her new mom. Rebecca's breath hitched. What did you tell her? That it was too early to know for sure, but that I hoped so, that you made both of us happy, and that was what mattered. Marcus brushed a tear from her cheek. Was that okay? I know we haven't talked about. It was perfect. Rebecca's voice broke. Ask me again in 6 months and I'll probably say yes. To being Lily's mom? To all of it? The cookies and the kiss and the life you're building? To being part of something real instead of just professionally successful? She pressed her forehead against his. To choosing happiness over reputation and love over loneliness. They stayed on the porch until the cold became unbearable, then moved inside to the couch where they'd sat earlier with Lily and Margaret. Rebecca curled against Marcus's chest, his arms wrapped around her, both of them drifting in that space between waking and sleep where the future felt full of possibility rather than danger. 6 months later, winter giving way to spring, Marcus stood in Rebecca's apartment, their apartment now, since he'd moved in 3 weeks ago with Lily's enthusiastic approval. He was making dinner while Rebecca worked late at the office and Lily sat at the counter doing homework with frequent interruptions to ask questions about fractions. His phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. Leaving now, be home in 20. Board approved the IPO timeline. Gerald was wrong about everything. Marcus smiled, typing back quickly. Congratulations. Dinner will be ready when you get here. Lily made you a card. Can't wait to see it. Love you. Love you too. He pocketed his phone and returned to chopping vegetables, listening to Lily explain her math problem with the kind of convoluted logic that somehow always arrived at the correct answer. The apartment around them had changed in the months since Marcus moved in. Photos on the walls now, Lily's artwork covering the refrigerator, shoes by the door that belonged to all three of them. It looked lived in, loved in, real in a way it never had when Rebecca occupied it alone. The elevator chimed, announcing Rebecca's arrival. Lily jumped down from her stool and ran to meet her, and Marcus heard their greeting from the kitchen. Rebecca's tired laugh, Lily's excited chatter about the card she'd made, the rustle of Rebecca's coat being hung up. When Rebecca appeared in the kitchen doorway, she looked exhausted but content, her eyes finding Marcus's across the space with the kind of recognition that came from truly knowing another person. She crossed to him, wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, and pressed her face into his shoulder. Long day? Very long day, but worth it. She squeezed him tighter. Coming home to this makes everything else manageable. Lily tugged at Rebecca's sleeve. Miss Rebecca, I made you a card. Want to see? Rebecca released Marcus and gave Lily her full attention. Absolutely. Show me. They moved to the living room, Lily presenting her card with appropriate ceremony. Marcus watched from the kitchen, something settling in his chest that felt like peace. A year ago, he'd been alone in his small apartment, convinced that Jennifer leaving had closed the door on happiness permanently. Now he stood in a home he shared with two people he loved, cooking dinner while evening light painted Chicago gold beyond the windows. His phone buzzed again, David asking if they were still on for weekend plans. Marcus confirmed, then pulled the chicken from the oven and called his family to dinner. Rebecca and Lily came to the table still discussing the card, their conversation flowing easily in the way that spoke of genuine affection rather than forced politeness. As they ate, passing dishes and sharing stories from their respective days, Marcus caught Rebecca's eye across the table. She smiled at him, reaching out to squeeze his hand briefly, And in that simple gesture was contained everything that mattered. The choice they'd made to fight for each other, the bravery it took to be vulnerable, the understanding that love didn't follow corporate protocols or social conventions, but showed up messy and complicated and absolutely worth it. Lily asked for seconds. Rebecca laughed at something Marcus said. Outside, the city hummed with millions of lives intersecting and diverging. But inside, in this apartment that had become a home, three people who'd found each other against all odds were simply living, eating dinner, making plans, building something that mattered more than quarterly earnings or professional reputation. And that, Marcus thought, as he cleared plates while Rebecca helped Lily with the last of her homework, was exactly what happiness looked like when you were brave enough to reach for it.